All right, get ready to dive deep. Because today we're tackling something a lot of you have been asking about: primary hyperparathyroidism. You send in some medical research, and honestly, I'm pretty curious myself to see what we uncover.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those conditions that people don't always hear about, so it can be eye-opening to understand what's actually going on.
Okay, so to kick things off, what IS, primary hyperparathyroidism? Break it down in simple terms.
Well, think about those tiny little glands in your neck, the parathyroid glands. In this condition, they basically go into overdrive, producing way too much parathyroid hormone, or PTH.
Gotcha. And PTH, this hormone, what's its normal job when things are working like they should?
PTH is basically the control center for your calcium levels. It makes sure the right amount of calcium is released from your bones, absorbed from what you eat, and it even controls how much calcium you lose when you go to the bathroom.
So if PTH is like the control center, having too much throws everything out of whack.
Exactly. It disrupts that delicate balance and leads to high calcium in the blood, something doctors call hypercalcemia.
Okay, that makes sense. So you mentioned these parathyroid glands are kind of the troublemakers here. Why would they suddenly decide to overproduce PTH? Does something trigger them?
It's not quite a sudden thing, but there are a few common culprits. The most frequent one is a benign tumor, a tiny lump called an adenoma, on one of the glands. It's like a little PTH factory that's working overtime.
So one little lump can mess up the whole system. That's pretty wild.
It is. Sometimes it's not just one gland, though. Sometimes all four become enlarged. That's called hyperplasia, and that can lead to even more PTH being produced.
Wait, there are only 4 parathyroid glands, right?
That's right. But here's where things get even more interesting. Sometimes these adenomas can actually be found in the thymus gland. That's in your chest, part of the immune system.
Hold on, in the thymus? I did not expect that.
Yeah, it's thought that during fetal development, some parathyroid cells might have wandered off and ended up in the thymus.
That's so strange. Okay, so we've got these adenomas and hyperplasia. But what causes them in the first place?
Well, in some cases, it's radiation exposure, like the Chernobyl disaster.
Oh yeah, definitely a terrible event.
Well, research has shown that the people who worked on the Chernobyl cleanup have a much higher risk of developing primary hyperparathyroidism even years later.
Wow, so the effects of radiation can really stick around for a long time. That's definitely something to think about.
For sure. And it's not just big events like Chernobyl either. Even low doses of radiation can increase your risk over time, especially if you're exposed during childhood.
Wow, that's a little scary. Okay, so besides radiation, what else might be at play here?
Well, genetics definitely play a role. Some people inherit genes that make them more likely to develop these parathyroid tumors.
So it can run in families.
Yep. It's like inheriting a slightly higher chance of those PTH factories going haywire. But it's not just radiation and genes. There are other, maybe even more surprising, connections to primary hyperparathyroidism.
More surprising connections. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What else is there?
Well, there's something called familial hyperparathyroidism, which is basically hyperparathyroidism that runs in families.
So if your parents or siblings have it, you're more likely to get it too.
Exactly. And it's often because of these inherited genetic conditions. And this type can be a little different. Sometimes it comes with much higher calcium levels or even something called a parathyroid crisis, which is a really serious medical situation.
Wow, that sounds pretty scary. Okay, so what else did we find in these research articles?
This one might surprise you. It's linked to thiazide therapy.
Wait, are you saying a medication can be linked to primary hyperparathyroidism? I don't get it.
Thiazide diuretics, they're often prescribed for high blood pressure, right? Well, they can cause a little increase in calcium levels, and in some cases, this can actually reveal underlying primary hyperparathyroidism that maybe wasn't diagnosed before.
So the medication's almost like it uncovers a hidden condition, like a detective. That's
Huh.
pretty wild. Okay, is there anything else in these papers? Any more surprising connections?
There's one more: lithium therapy.
Okay, listeners, if you're taking lithium, this is for you. Tell me more about this.
So lithium is used to treat certain psychiatric conditions. And it turns out it can also cause higher calcium levels and even an increase in PTH. It doesn't happen to everyone who takes lithium, but it's something to be aware of for sure.
So if you're taking lithium and start feeling things like really thirsty or just worn out and fatigued, those might be signs to talk to your doctor about.
Exactly. It's always better to be safe than sorry. You know, we've talked about what primary hyperparathyroidism is, why it happens, these surprising connections. But there's one thing that really stands out to me, and that's the link between how much calcium you get and the risk of developing primary hyperparathyroidism.
Yeah, as we were going through all this, I was wondering about that myself. What is the connection there?
It might sound counterintuitive, But research suggests that not getting enough calcium over a long period of time might actually increase the risk of developing primary hyperparathyroidism.
Really? So getting enough calcium isn't just about having strong bones. It might also be a way to help prevent this hormonal problem too.
That's what some researchers think. More research is definitely needed to say for sure, but it just goes to show how important our diet and lifestyle are. They can impact our health in so many ways, some we may not even realize.
It really is amazing how everything seems connected when you look at the bigger picture of our health. And speaking of connections, we talked about calcium. What about vitamin D? Does that play a role in primary hyperparathyroidism too?
Yeah, it really does make you think about all the different factors that go into keeping our bodies running smoothly. We've been talking about calcium, but what about vitamin D? Does that have anything to do with primary hyperparathyroidism?
That's a great question. Researchers are looking into that right now. It makes sense to think there might be a connection because vitamin D is so important for absorbing calcium. Some studies even suggest that if you don't get enough vitamin D, it could actually increase your risk of developing primary hypoparathyroidism. So that's another piece of the puzzle then. It seems like the more we learn about this condition, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
That's the thing about science, right? Always more to discover.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We learned about primary hyperparathyroidism, how it can throw those calcium levels out of whack when the parathyroid glands make too much PTH.
And we talked about all the different things that can cause it, from those benign tumors to radiation exposure, and even those surprising links to genes and certain medications.
It's pretty amazing how many different paths can lead to this one condition. But if there's one thing I'm taking away from all this, it's that knowledge really is power.
I completely agree. Knowing about primary hyperparathyroidism, understanding those potential risks, and just taking an active role in your health, that can make a big difference.
Definitely. And to everyone listening, if you have any concerns at all, don't hesitate to talk to your doctor. They can give you personalized advice and answer any questions you might have.
It's been great chatting with you today. Who knew parathyroid glands could be so interesting?
Right. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and maybe feel a little more empowered to take charge of your health. Until next time, stay curious.